little more order to the White House.
This is New Day with Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
All right, welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is New Day. It's Tuesday, August 1st, 6 o'clock here in New York. And here's the starting line. The White House facing another bombshell revelation in the Russia investigation. White House officials and counsel for the president said the president had no role in developing a response to Don Jr.'s meeting with a group of Russians. But now the Washington Post reports that President Trump personally dictated his son's initial and misleading statement on that meeting with a Russian lawyer, despite these repeated denials. Again, the president's attorney, the White House, all said he had nothing to do with it. Is President Trump now putting himself in a position where the special counsel will have to review his actions? The president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, raising eyebrows by saying the Trump campaign was, quote, too disorganized to collude with Russia. Kushner making the bizarre defense in a private meeting with congressional interns.
Okay, all of this in just hours after President Trump said that there was no chaos in his White House. He ousted the mooch, Anthony Scaramucci, his new communications director, the president's new chief of staff, John Kelly, apparently reining in the free-for-all inside the West Wing. So all of this as a scathing op-ed was published by a Republican senator who unleashed on fellow conservatives for giving President Trump a pass. This was Arizona's Jeff Flake. He describes an executive branch, quote, in chaos, and a president who has, quote, seeming affection for strong men and authoritarians, end quote. So what impact will those words have? We have all of this covered for you this morning. Let's begin with CNN's Joe Johns, live at the White House. Another busy morning, Joe.
That's right, Allison. The question here is whether there was concealment at the highest level at the White House after the stunning revelation about the administration's response to the report in the New York Times that Don Jr. met with a Russian lawyer. It could have legal implications for the president himself as the White House continues to deal with the fallout from the latest shakeup.
The Washington Post reporting that President Trump personally dictated his son's misleading initial statement about the reason for the June 2016 meeting with a Russian lawyer. It all happened on Air Force One while the president was returning from the G20 summit last month. The Post says President Trump overruled his advisors who were advocating for full transparency, directing the statement to describe the focus of the meeting being about adoption of Russian children. Trump Jr.'s own emails released days later showed that the meeting was actually about providing the Trump campaign with incriminating information on Hillary Clinton from the Russian government. It remains unclear if President Trump knew this at the time. The Washington Post reports that White House advisors now worry that the president's direct involvement leaves him needlessly vulnerable to allegations of a cover-up.
I wasn't involved in the statement drafting at all. Nor was the president. I'm assuming that was between Mr. Donald Trump Jr., between Don Jr. and his lawyer.
After vehemently denying that President Trump was involved last month, one of the president's private attorneys refutes the Washington Post report in a statement saying, apart from being of no consequence, the characterizations are misinformed, inaccurate, and not pertinent. These stunning revelations coming after the president vowed there was no chaos at the White House, tweeting that it was a great day, despite another major shakeup.
I have no doubt that he will be an absolutely superb chief of staff.
Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci ousted by the new chief of staff, General John Kelly, after only days on the job. Scaramucci's brief tenure marred by a vulgar tirade about his White House colleagues and amplified in a bizarre interview on New Day.
As you know from the Italian expression, the fish stinks from the head down. But I can tell you two fish that don't stink, okay? And that's me and the president.
Negative media coverage of the attacks on Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon eroding the president's trust in Scaramucci.
The president certainly felt that Anthony's comments were inappropriate for a person in that position.
Despite the president's own history of vulgar comments.
Grab him by the
which led to a rare apology in the final stretch of the campaign.
Two sources close to the White House tell CNN that the president initially found Scaramucci's comments amusing but soured after Scaramucci appeared to be overshadowing him. The new White House chief of staff making it clear he is going to stop the free-for-all here at the White House. All staffers now report directly to him. Chris and Allison.
Joe Johns, thank you. Let's bring in the panel. CNN politics reporter and editor-at-large Chris Cillizza, CNN political commentator Ryan Lizza, and CNN political analyst Michael Shear. Michael, we needed you just so that this isn't a panel completely comprised of Italians.
Yeah,
Camerata, Cuomo, Lizza, Cillizza, and now at least we have Michael Shear. And in fact, I'm going to start with you. The Washington Post reporting, okay? Let's just play Jay Sekulow again, one of the team of attorneys supporting and speaking for the president. We talked to him specifically about the suggestion of the president's involvement. Let's be honest. It was odd to believe that the president had nothing to do with something of this level of importance. But here is what Jay Sekulow said. So he didn't have anything to do with the statement that Don Jr. put out that was being worked on with his team?
That was the statement that Don Jr. put out. Are you talking about yesterday's, Chris?
The one over the weekend that the president's team was helping with.
That was written. No, that was written by Donald Trump Jr. and I'm sure in consultation with his lawyer.
Because the New York Times has reporting that the president okayed the statement.
Well, they're incorrect.
The New York Times is wrong.
Yeah, I know. Is that shocking that sometimes they make a mistake?
Yeah. It's shocking because they didn't make a mistake, Michael Shear. And look, as we often do, we didn't have the reporting solid, so we asked him about it and we probed about it. He said he had nothing to do with it. So what is this? Is that just a lie, or do you think Sekulow didn't know? That seems unlikely given the Washington Post reporting.
Right. Look, I mean, the Post reporting essentially builds on what we had at the Times about the fact that there had been these discussions on Air Force One, that we had that the president was involved and signed off on it. Now the Post pushes the reporting further that, in fact, the president was a central player in drafting it. There are kind of two broad pieces to the Russia problem for the president. The underlying substance of did the campaign collude and meet with Russians, and then what's the response been since then, and have there been attempts to cover up and mislead investigators as they probe that? This goes in a really bad way to the latter, right? You don't put out the information that this was a meeting that was about something else when it was when the documents, the emails clearly described that it was about meeting with Russians for the purpose of influencing the campaign. And I think one last point is that this goes to also the other story that you've been talking about this morning, which is General Kelly, and the question of, there's no discipline in this White House about what the message is. The lawyers are on one page, the staff is talking about another thing. The question really going forward will be, can General Kelly bring the kind of discipline to this White House that would at least get them all on the same page so that these kinds of situations where they're providing information that's just flatly not true to the public. I mean, that's what they've got to get a handle on.
So, Chris Cillizza, let's rewind the clock. For people who are just waking up, let's just remind them what this initial statement was that we now know, according to the Washington Post, was actually dictated by the president. So here's what Don Jr. said on July 8th about that meeting. It was a short introductory meeting. I asked Jared and Paul Manafort to stop by. We primarily discussed a program about the adoption of Russian children that was active and popular with American families years ago and was since ended by the Russian government. But it was not a campaign issue at the time, and there was no follow-up. I was asked to attend the meeting by an acquaintance, but was not told the name of the person I would be meeting with beforehand. Now, that is misleading because we now have learned that actually he was promised dirt on Hillary Clinton. That's why he took the meeting. It wasn't originally that they may have talked about Russian adoption once they got in there, but that's not what the original meeting was about. Now,
and we know that, remember, this isn't a suggestion. In his own emails, Don Jr. said, I love it. That was the pretense for the invite.
Absolutely. Now, it is not a crime to mislead the American people or the press. So where does that leave us today?
Let me first say, Allison, that when people out in the world say that reporters parse the statements of public officials and those around them too closely, I would refer to that Don Jr. statement because, as you point out, it's misleading. It's not false. There's nothing in it that we know is absolutely, totally a lie, but it's about, it's the tail of the elephant as opposed to the entire elephant, right? So that's point one. Point two, it is not a crime to do what they're doing here, but this is more smoke. I feel like I'm on a couple times a week and we have the same conversation, which is, no, there is not a fire yet. There is no proof of collusion, although Don Trump Jr.'s meeting certainly, the June meeting certainly doesn't look good. But everything here keeps pointing to the fact that Donald Trump was more involved than he said, that the entire thing was more than they let on in the beginning. Don Trump Jr.'s statement, which apparently, according to the Washington Post, was dictated by Donald Trump Sr., had to be changed multiple times as that week went along. And that's what I always keep coming back to here. If you are the President of the United States and you believe in your heart of hearts, as Donald Trump says that he does, you believe in your heart of hearts you have done nothing wrong here, that this is, in his words, a total witch hunt, a hoax, then you should want to help Bob Mueller as much as possible get to the bottom of this, because it is the only possible way you could be exonerated in this, fully exonerated in the eyes of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. That is not what he has done, and in fact, it's almost the opposite of what he's done.
So, Ryan Lizza, you have illegality, but that is a really high bar in judging propriety by leadership. You know, it doesn't have to be illegal to be wrong. This was a misleading statement. This is not what the meeting was about. We know that from Don Jr.'s own emails. And now we know that unless the president was unaware of the emails and what the actual context was, he was involved in an intentional deception about the meeting. Not illegal, but how is it not wrong?
Yeah, well, look, the statement said it was primarily about adoptions, right? So just to play devil's advocate, if indeed it comes out that even though the meeting was set up to be about giving information about Hillary Clinton from the Russian government, they got in there and it really was most of the time about adoptions. You know, perhaps they have this sort of legalistic leg to stand on. But your point about what did President Trump know precisely when he was, as the Washington Post says he was, dictating the statement, I think is really important. Did Trump know about the email chain from Don Jr. and his associate who was setting him up with the Russians? Did he clearly know exactly what the details were about that meeting afterward? So when he was dictating the statement, did he know that he was affirmatively
imagine if he didn't
that he was spreading?
Could you imagine if
the president didn't know?
Yeah, if the president wasn't told about the emails, which is almost inconceivable.
I think it's conceivable. Why would the president know about his son's emails? I mean, I don't know
how
that.
Could he release a statement? How could he release a statement?
They're sitting on the plane doing the statement without knowing.
Right.
Right.
I mean,
think the president,
pretty bad. The president's going to sit there?
This is what has to come out in the investigation, obviously. We're speculating. But I think that the president, based on his style, seems to be on a need-to-know basis.
Fair point.
He doesn't know the nitty-gritty.
But if I'm your lawyer, right, and you're like, all right, here's what we're going to say. You don't think I offer up, well, hold on a second, Allison, because, you know, these emails, which Kushner's lawyers found, so that was starting this universe of discussion.
I just can't tell if on Air Force One there was any legal mind weighing in on this, or if the president was just dictating, here's what we're going to say.
Well, according to Jay Sekulow, Don Jr.'s lawyers were all over it, and you have to assume they knew what the kid had.
He's the reliable narrator
the man
at this point about that. Guys, panel?
I think he had to know if the Post's reporting is correct. It seems that the president did indeed know, because remember, the dispute, according to the Post, correct me if I'm wrong, was that Don Jr. and his lawyers wanted a more fulsome statement because their assumption was that the New York Times knew even more about this. And then the White House, led by the president, said, wait a second, we don't need to say all that. Let's just talk about the adoption part of that meeting.
All right, guys, thank you very much. Stick around because it is a very, very busy news morning. We have a lot to get to, okay? So now to this CNN exclusive. According to two sources, before becoming the new White House chief of staff, General John Kelly was upset with how President Trump handled the firing of FBI Director James Comey and considered stepping down as Secretary of Homeland Security. CNN crime and justice reporter Shimon Prokupez joins us now with more. What have you learned?
Oh, that's right, Allison. So we've learned that new White House Chief of Staff John Kelly was so upset with the way President Trump handled the firing of FBI Director James Comey that he called Comey shortly after he was terminated to say how angry he was. At the time, Kelly was Secretary of Homeland Security. The sources say Kelly was particularly upset by the way Comey was treated by learning he had been fired on the news rather than by the president. The call took place while Comey was traveling back from Los Angeles to Washington on May 9th after learning the news. Comey declined to comment to us about the story, as well as others contacted for the story, Allison.
Okay. So I understand that you're told that General Kelly went even further in that phone call.
Yeah, that's right. So, it was a pretty lengthy conversation, and we're told that Kelly was so angry that he even told Comey he was contemplating resigning from his position as Secretary of Homeland Security as a show of solidarity. We're told Comey responded by telling him not to resign. Sources have cautioned us that it was unclear how serious Kelly was about resigning himself. And of course, that never happened. And now he's White House Chief of Staff, Allison and Chris.
Well, Shimon, and that's why this reporting is so significant, because we're trying to figure out, well, how will General Kelly tame what's happening with the White House, tame the president's instincts? Yeah. And this is a window into what he sees as too much, what he's willing to do about it. So helpful, if nothing else. And all of this done in light of yet another shakeup at the White House, and maybe the biggest surprise to date. Anthony Scaramucci out as communications director. Supposedly, the general didn't want him there. But why did they get rid of him? And what does this mean? Next.
I could describe...
Welcome back to Early Start. I'm Dave Briggs.
Good morning. I'm Allison Cossack sitting in for Christine Romans. It's 30 minutes past the hour. And we begin with new reporting that suggests President Trump himself personally dictated the initial misleading statement about Don Jr.'s meeting with a Russian lawyer during the campaign. According to the Washington Post, the president insisted on a change in strategy after advisors planned to issue a truthful statement to get ahead of the original story before it broke in the New York Times. The Post, citing people with knowledge of the deliberations, says the president dictated a statement saying his son and the Russian lawyer discussed a program about the adoption of Russian children. The statement was worked out on Air Force One on the flight home from the G20 summit in Germany.
The adoption claims were later shown to be misleading. Trump Jr. eventually acknowledged he took the meeting because he was promised damaging information on Hillary Clinton from the Russian government. President Trump's lawyer already on the record, denying the president had anything to do with crafting this statement.
So he didn't have anything to do with the statement that Don Jr. put out that was being worked on with his team?
That was the statement that Don Jr. put out. Are you talking about yesterday's, Chris?
The one over the weekend that the president's team was helping with.
That was written. Well, no, that was written by Donald Trump Jr. and I'm sure in consultation with his lawyer.
Because the New York Times has reporting that the president okayed the statement.
Well, they're incorrect.
The New York Times is wrong.
Yeah, I know. Is that shocking? That sometimes they make a mistake?
The extent of the president's personal intervention adding to a series of actions Trump has taken that advisors fear could place him and some members of his inner circle in legal jeopardy. There's concern that his direct involvement leaves him vulnerable to allegations of a cover-up. We should also note CNN was the first to report concern that White House aides involved in the Trump Jr. response may have exposed themselves to special counsel scrutiny.
President's son-in-law and top advisor Jared Kushner offering up a new defense to knock down claims that members of the Trump election team colluded with Russia. On Monday, Kushner spoke privately to a group of congressional interns and told them collusion could not have occurred because Trump campaign staffers were barely talking to each other. Quote, they thought we colluded, Kushner told the interns, but we couldn't even collude with our own local offices.
Okay, we know what Kushner told the interns because a source provided a copy of his written notes to the publication Foreign Policy. Kushner also downplayed his failure to report more than 100 instances of travel and contacts with foreign officials on his security clearance forms, which he had to update twice to include meetings with Russian officials. Kushner claimed he didn't track those meetings because he didn't expect to get into politics.
The days of tolerating BS in this White House are over, end quote. That from a source close to the Trump White House. And if you don't believe it, just ask Anthony Scaramucci. His tenure as communications director ending before it really ever began. Technically, his start date was August 15th. Scaramucci lasting exactly 11 days. A White House statement saying Mr. Scaramucci felt it was best to give Chief of Staff John Kelly a clean slate and the ability to build his own team.
Sources say Kelly delivered the news in a face-to-face meeting with Scaramucci after being sworn in. They say the retired Marine general thought Scaramucci lacked discipline and severely damaged his credibility after a profanity-laced tirade in The New Yorker. And President Trump apparently agreed.
Look, the president certainly felt that Anthony's comments were inappropriate for a person in that position. I don't think that it's complicated to understand that the president felt the comments were inappropriate. I can't really explain it any further than that. I'm not sure what's hard.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders also telling reporters that all White House staff will now report to Kelly. The president had no official comment on Scaramucci's departure, but tweeted last night, "A great day at the White House." Earlier, Mr. Trump had also tweeted, "No chaos at the White House." Nothing to be seen here, Allison.
If that's a great day, I would hate to see what a not so great day looks like.
Well, it's funny, that word great, right? If you're making America great again, what do we mean by
really
that if that was a great day yesterday?
All right, new Chief of Staff John Kelly was so upset with how President Trump handled the firing of FBI Director James Comey in May that he called Comey afterward and told him he was considering resigning. That's according to two sources familiar with a conversation between the two men. They tell CNN it is not clear how serious Kelly was about stepping down from his post as Secretary of Homeland Security. He's described as angry and hurt by the way Comey was treated.
The former FBI director learned he was fired from TV news reports as he was addressing staffers at the agency's LA office. Comey took a call from Kelly while he was traveling back to Washington and told him not to step down. Comey has declined to comment. The White House and the Department of Homeland Security have also not responded to CNN's request for a comment.
Obamacare's outlook in 2018 just got a little brighter, in Ohio at least. Insurers agreed to sell policies in 19 of the 20 counties that had 0 options next year. That's according to the state's Department of Insurance. And regulators are working to bring coverage to the last county. This cuts the number of so-called bear counties in half, ones that lack insurers on their Obamacare exchange. 18 counties in Nevada and Indiana are still at risk of having 0 Obamacare providers next year, but the deadline is coming soon. Carriers have until late September to commit to participating in 2018. Roughly 11,000 Ohio residents were at risk after Anthem and Paramount Healthcare exited the exchanges earlier this year. The insurers blamed huge losses and uncertainty of the future of Obamacare, including the continuation of federal subsidies that help pay for low-income Americans. However, the president is currently threatening to end those payments as he pushes for the repeal of Obamacare.
You know, a key word there that you said is uncertainty, and that's what's facing the entire healthcare system in the United States until we see some leadership on this issue.
Yes.
Ahead, friends of Anthony Scaramucci aren't the only ones sad to see him leave the White House.
I guess it's time to say goodbye. Anthony Scaramucci, we hardly knew Chi.
As you might. Did President Trump dictate the initial response to his son's meeting with a Russian lawyer? A major new report this morning that could spell further trouble for the commander-in-chief.
Well, it didn't take long for the new chief of staff to make his mark. Anthony Scaramucci is out as communications chief, and John Kelly putting a quick end to a whirlwind 11 days. Good morning and welcome to Early Start. I'm Allison Cossack. I'm sitting in for Christine Romans.
I'm Dave Briggs. It's been an extraordinary week in news, and it's only Tuesday, August 1st. It's 4 a.m. in the East. We begin with new reporting that suggests President Trump himself personally dictated the initial misleading statement about Don Jr.'s meeting with a Russian lawyer during the campaign. According to the Washington Post, the president insisted on a change in strategy after advisors planned to issue a truthful statement to get ahead of the original story before it broke in the New York Times. The Post, citing people with knowledge of the deliberations, say the president dictated a statement saying his son and the Russian lawyer discussed a program about the adoption of Russian children. The statement was worked out on Air Force One on the flight home from the G20 summit in Germany, where, mind you, the president just met with Vladimir Putin for several hours.
So the adoption claims were later shown to be misleading, and Trump Jr. eventually acknowledged he took the meeting because he was promised damaging information on Hillary Clinton from the Russian government. President Trump's lawyer already on the record denying the president had anything to do with crafting the statement.
So he didn't have anything to do with the statement that Don Jr. put out that was being worked on with his team?
That was the statement that Don Jr. put out. Are you talking about yesterday's, Chris?
The one over the weekend that the president's team was helping with.
That was written. Well, no, that was written by Donald Trump Jr. and I'm sure in consultation with his lawyer.
Because the New York Times has reporting that the president okayed the statement.
Well, they're incorrect.
The New York Times is wrong.
Yeah, I know. Is that shocking that sometimes they make a mistake?
The extent of the president's personal intervention, adding to a series of actions Trump has taken that advisors fear could place him and some members of his inner circle in legal jeopardy. There's concern that his direct involvement leaves him vulnerable to allegations of a cover-up. We should also note here, CNN was first to report concern that White House aides involved in the Trump Jr. response may have exposed themselves to special counsel scrutiny.
The president's son-in-law and top advisor Jared Kushner offering up a new defense to knock down claims that members of the Trump election team colluded with Russia. On Monday, Kushner spoke privately to a group of congressional interns and told them collusion could not have occurred because Trump campaign staffers were barely talking to each other. They thought we colluded, Kushner told the interns, but we couldn't even collude with our local offices.
We know what Kushner told the interns because a source provided a copy of his written notes to the publication Foreign Policy. Kushner also downplayed his failure to report more than 100 instances of travel and contacts with foreign officials on his security clearance forms, which he had to update twice to include meetings with Russian officials. Now, Kushner claims he didn't track those meetings because he didn't expect to get into politics.
The days of tolerating BS in the White House are over. That from a source close to the Trump White House. And if you don't believe it, just ask Anthony Scaramucci. His tenure as communications director ending before it really ever began. Scaramucci lasting exactly 11 days. A White House statement saying Mr. Scaramucci felt it was best to give Chief of Staff John Kelly a clean slate and the ability to build his own team.
Sources say Kelly delivered the news in a face-to-face meeting with Scaramucci after being sworn in. They say the retired Marine general thought Scaramucci lacked discipline and severely damaged his credibility after a profanity-laced tirade in the New Yorker. And President Trump apparently agreed.
Look, the president certainly felt that Anthony's comments were inappropriate for a person in that position. I don't think that it's complicated to understand that the president felt the comments were inappropriate. I can't really explain it any further than that. I'm not sure what's hard.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders also telling reporters that all White House staff will now report to Kelly. The president had no official comment on Scaramucci's departure, but here's what he tweeted last night. A great day at the White House. Earlier, Mr. Trump had also tweeted, no chaos at the White House.
No.
Funny. Didn't see what he did in the morning, and then by the evening, everything had changed.
Smooth sailing, my friend. All right, new Chief of Staff John Kelly so upset with how President Trump handled the firing of FBI Director James Comey in May, he called Comey afterward and told him he, too, was considering resigning. That's according to two sources familiar with the conversation between the two men. They tell CNN it's not clear how serious Kelly was about stepping down from his post as Secretary of Homeland Security. He's described, though, as, quote, angry and hurt by the way Comey was treated.
The former FBI director learned he was fired from TV news reports as he was addressing staffers at the agency's Los Angeles office. Comey took a call from Kelly while he was traveling back to Washington and told him not to step down. Comey has declined to comment. The White House and the Department of Homeland Security have not responded to CNN's request for a comment.
And just when you thought it couldn't get more bizarre, there's this. CNN has learned a prankster in the United Kingdom tricked several White House officials into email exchanges, with the prankster posing as other top aides to the President of the United States. Among the highlights, the prankster convinced a White House Homeland Security official tasked with cyber security that he was Jared Kushner. That conversation started with the fake Kushner inviting Tom Bossert to a party with the real Bossert responding he'd be there and offering up his private email address unsolicited.
Okay, then there's the prankster masquerading as Reince Priebus getting into a tense exchange with the real Anthony Scaramucci the day after Priebus's resignation was announced. The fake Priebus wrote this: "At no stage have you acted in a way that's even remotely classy. General Kelly will do a fine job. I'll even admit he will do a better job than me. But the way in which that transition has come about has been diabolical and hurtful. I don't expect a reply."
Now, the real Mooch did reply, saying, "You know what you did, we all do, even today, but rest assured we were prepared. A man would apologize."
Then the fake Priebus responds with, "I can't believe you are questioning my ethics. The so-called Mooch who can't even manage his first week in the White House without leaving upset in his wake. I have nothing to apologize for."
And finally this from Scaramucci: "Read Shakespeare, particularly Othello. You are right there. My family is fine, by the way, and will thrive. I know what you did. No more replies from me." Now, White House officials acknowledge the incidents and say they're taking the matter seriously. The same pranksters fooled execs from Goldman Sachs and Citigroup. All of us are subject to cyber hacking this way, but these are top White House officials. One would think, especially those in charge of cybersecurity, you'd be a little more on it. Hashtag great day at the White House.
All right, a troubling pattern overnight in Venezuela. Several opposition leaders taken from their homes in the dark of night. Is an emboldened...
Offer up is free to use. Find...
Welcome back to The Lead, sticking with politics and a story that we're breaking for you tonight right now. Hook, line, and sinker. A self-described email prankster in the UK fooled a number of senior White House officials into thinking that he was other White House officials, including an episode where the prankster convinced the White House official tasked with cybersecurity, Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert, that he was Jared Kushner, and he received Bossert's private email address unsolicited. He shared some of those emails with us. Quote, "Tom, we are arranging a bit of a soiree towards the end of August," the fake Jared Kushner on an Outlook account wrote to Bossert's official White House email account. Quote, "It would be great if you could make it. I promise food of at least comparable quality to that which we ate in Iraq. Should be a great evening." The very real Bossert wrote back to the very fake Jared Kushner, quote, "Thanks, Jared. With a promise like that, I can't refuse. Also, if you ever need it, my personal email is," and then he gave his personal email address. White House officials acknowledged to CNN that the incidents happened and said they were taking the matter seriously. Quote, "We take all cyber-related issues very seriously and are looking into these incidents further," White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders told CNN this evening. Cyber experts consulted by CNN say that the incidents are illustrative of how vulnerable Americans, even those in the highest reaches of power, the Trump White House, remain to the potential threat of what is called spear phishing. That's the process through which officials are duped by hackers and expose government computers and systems to various cyber threats. You might remember this happening to Hillary Clinton campaign chair John Podesta. Now, no one in any of these White House situations clicked any links, making them or their computers vulnerable, and the prankster appears motivated by mischief, not anything more malignant. The prankster told CNN, quote, "I try and keep it on the humorous side of things. I'm not looking for the keys to the vault." So the severity of these White House pranks should not be overstated, but spear phishers often begin the process by falsely posing as a friend or associate before asking the victim to take further action. Another exchange appears to have possibly played a role in the tensions between then White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci and former White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus. Masquerading as Priebus, the prankster emailed Scaramucci's official White House account using a mail.com account on Saturday. Fake Priebus attacked Scaramucci in the email. Quote, "At no stage have you acted in a way that's even remotely classy. General Kelly will do a fine job. I'll even admit he will do a better job than me, but the way in which that transition has come about has been diabolical and hurtful. I don't expect a reply." The very real Scaramucci responded to the very fake Priebus, "You know what you did. We all do, even today, but rest assured we were prepared. A man would apologize." Fake Priebus wrote back to real Scaramucci, "I can't believe you're questioning my ethics. The so-called mooch who can't even manage his first week in the White House without leaving upset in his wake. I have nothing to apologize for." Again, the actual Scaramucci responded, "Read Shakespeare, particularly Othello. You are right there. My family is fine, by the way, and will thrive. I know what you did. No more replies from me." In a different exchange, the very real Scaramucci was hoodwinked by the same prankster pretending to be ambassador to Russia designate John Huntsman. Quote, whose head should roll first? The bogus Huntsman asked from a Gmail account on Friday, before the previous termination had been announced. Maybe I can help things along somewhat, responded the very real Scaramucci. Both of them, an apparent reference to Priebus and Steve Bannon. Huntsman himself was also tricked with the prankster pretending to be Eric Trump, the president's son. Eric Trump was similarly hoodwinked by the prankster, emailing as his older brother, Donald Trump Jr., though Eric realized it and said he was notifying the authorities. Neither Huntsman nor Trump would comment on the record. The prankster has previously fooled major bank CEOs from Goldman Sachs and Citigroup. He's long been a supporter of President Trump, and he's even experienced Trump's management style when he was forced out of the transition. Governor Chris Christie will join us with his take on the White House shakeup next. And here's a look at tomorrow's New York Daily News cover. Adios, muchacho.
General Kelly has the full authority to operate within the White House, and all staff will report to him.
You said earlier all staff will report to the new chief of staff. Does that include Jared Kushner? Does that include Steve Bannon? Everyone reports to Kelly?
That includes everybody at the White House. Okay.
That was White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders earlier today outlining the White House chain of command now that the new chief of staff, retired Marine General John Kelly, has been sworn in and Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci has left his post. But might that new flow chart be easier said than done? Will the president's son-in-law and chief campaign, now White House strategist, really relegate themselves to talking to Kelly instead of to the president? Will they take what is essentially a demotion? New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, a friend and confidant of the president, told CNN about the Scaramucci ousting, quote, the actions taken today by the president and General Kelly will professionalize the communications operation in a way that will serve the president and the nation very well. I spoke with Governor Christie a short while ago about the White House tumult. So you're confident that General Kelly can turn things around?
Well, listen, I think if the president appropriately empowers him, and the general is, working hard at it, I think he can. He certainly has the experience to do it. He's run large organizations and brought discipline to them, so I think he does. But again, this is a team effort. And, this was the first show I came on very early in February and said that I thought there were problems with the way the president was being served by staff.
Yeah.
And I was very candid with you about that, and I'm hopeful now. I think General Kelly has the background, the experience to be able to do it well. But everybody's got to work as a team. And they all got to understand that they're working to try to make the country better, and the country will get better through a better Trump presidency.
So one of the big issues has been that there really have been like 3 chiefs of staff. In addition to Priebus and now General Kelly, there is the Bannon chief of staff, and then there is the Jared Kushner chief of staff, with the Ivanka ancillary chief of staff there. And people who have worked in the White House have said that's very confusing and it makes it difficult to get things done. So when you say, as long as Kelly has the tools he need, or whatever the term was you said, yep. I assume you mean as long as everybody reports to Kelly instead of there being this kind of spread out power structure?
Well, that's what I have suggested from the beginning, what we suggested in our initial transition report. And that's why I said at the time, if you remember, Jake, that it's the structure that was the biggest problem, not the people. Having a structure where 3 people are in charge means no one's in charge. I heard the president loud and clear. He said General Kelly is in charge. So if that, in fact, is the case, and the president enforces that with the rest of the people, that General Kelly is in charge, he has a much better chance of success.
So you fault the structure. The Wall Street Journal editorial board has a different take. They wrote after General Kelly was selected and Reince Priebus was deposed, quote, this shuffling of the staff furniture won't matter unless Mr. Trump accepts that the White House problem isn't Mr. Priebus, it's him. That's from the conservative Wall Street Journal editorial page. Do you agree that President Trump and how disciplined he has been or not been is part of the problem?
I think that's part of who he is. And so I think if you're the chief of staff, you need to understand the style of the principal, the approach of the principal, and you have to make a structure that works for that. What I said before was the 3-person structure doesn't work. And that's not just an aside. I mean, that's the key to it. Now you have one person, the president has said, who is in charge from the staff perspective. And I think the big key for General Kelly is not only to have that empowerment from the president, which he seems to now have, but also Jim Baker said it very well. He said this to me during the transition when I interviewed him, and he said it again recently. The chief of staff has to remember to be staff and not chief. Yeah. And so you got to work with your staff. You got to make them comfortable and let everybody know we're rowing in the same direction and rowing for the President of the United States. He's the person who was elected. You got to work for him.
But just to be clear, you're saying that this will work potentially if Bannon and Jared report to Kelly.
Everyone must report to the Chief of Staff other than the President of the United States.
Because that's not how it works. And we still don't know if that's how it's going to work.
Well, we did. I read a comment this morning that the President said General Kelly has full authority. Now, I read that comment, Jake, to mean that everyone has to report to the Chief of Staff. I think that's what it should have happened from the beginning. I think that would have helped Reince Priebus to have been more successful in that than it turned out he was. And I've said all along, I thought Reince was a bit of a victim of the structure that got set up. In the end, what people have to be focused on in the White House is how to best make the president most effective. And you can't change your principle except around the edges. He's now 70 years old. He's had enormous success.
71.
He's 71 now? Okay, thank you. I'm trying to help you, Mr. President. And the fact is that, you know, what we need is to have a structure and an attitude in the White House that says, we are here not for ourselves. We are here for the country and this president.
But when he does things like announces the transgender ban on the military, which would remove 4,000 currently serving service members and members of the reserves, which the New York Times reports when General Mattis found out about it, he was appalled. When he does that seemingly impulsively, announcing it on Twitter, no apparent coordination with the people that would implement this, very little idea of how this would be implemented. Are there really going to be 4,000 members of the military kicked out of the military? Doesn't that undermine his agenda?
Well, I think what happened there, Jacob, I don't have inside information on this, but my sense from having worked with the president for a long time and known him for 15 years is my guess is that there was some significant disagreement inside the administration about this policy. And it tells you again about the structure and the problem with the structure. So the president, I think, had probably heard enough of the disagreement. He had made his decision, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. He had made his decision, and he wasn't going to go through the process again to get the announcement. He was going to announce it and then work on the back end to make sure the process put it into place. Now, you know, that's his style. We've seen that over and over again.
It's chaotic, though. Empirically, it's chaotic.
Well, but again, I think it is a result of, in large part, the structure that existed in the White House. If you have a chief of staff who's in charge and the president trusts that chief of staff and he's fully empowered, then all this stuff will go through the chief of staff. I think that part of it was the president wasn't appropriately briefed beforehand, before he became president, about the diffuse structure being a real problem. And so now we're going to see, though. Now, that's been my theory, as you know, since February.
Yeah.
So now we're going to see if I'm right.
Yeah. The Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has been having an unpleasant time, I think it's fair to say, over the last
fair to say.
Fair to say, with the president publicly shaming him, humiliating him for the decision he made to recuse himself, a decision that I believe you have said was the right decision. Have you not?
Well, I don't know. I don't think I've ever commented on that publicly, no.
Well, do you think it was the right decision?
Well, I think it depends on why he really recused himself. I think if he recused himself because he gave confusing and inconsistent answers at his hearing regarding his contact with Russia and Russian officials, that then to be in charge of the Russia investigation is problematic for him. But if it was because of an association with the campaign, well, he could have recused himself and told the president-elect and everybody right then that was a reason to recuse. I don't believe that was a reason to recuse. Lots of people have been involved in campaigns at some level and then gone on to serve as Attorney General. We've seen that in any number of instances. Certainly, Attorney General Holder was very involved in the Obama campaign, then became Attorney General. Didn't recuse himself from anything of significance, even though a lot of political things came up.
Yeah, but there were no investigations into the Obama 2008 campaign.
But Jake, this investigation goes well beyond just the campaign.
Sure.
Right? And so I don't think there was a need for him to recuse himself based upon his association with the campaign. Now, if he believed that once he gave answers that at best were confusing, regarding his interaction with Russia, at that point, I think, it was much more defensible to recuse. But I want to be clear about what I think needed to be done here. I don't think he needed to recuse over his involvement in the campaign, but I do think that once he gave misleading or confusing answers about Russia, that became more of a problem.
What do you think about the way President Trump has been treating him? Really, I mean, it seems like berating him until he...